fired up again to have Jeff Benedict back on our podcast, previously a radio host at 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. And his Twitter handle, if you guys want to follow him on X, at JMB_CU16. He actually coached at Westlake High School too for their basketball program. I know we didn't dive into that last time. Jeff and I chatted a little bit offline. I found that really cool. Coached Pac-Man, Cam Newton, really awesome. Jeff, wanted to ask you, since we're going to focus mainly on the Falcons, but what are your thoughts on everything that's going on with Caitlin Clark and her getting roughed up in the WNBA and all this like headlines that's being generated in the media?
I'll be honest, man. I really hate a lot of the conversations around her right now. Right? I mean, I really wish 90% of the conversations about her weren't race related, and they are. And I think it's really unfortunate because I think it takes away from both herself as well as the league. Right? And I really hate that for her. I hate that for the league. I'm not a WNBA fan. I honestly watch the championship series every year, and I watch the women's Final Four, but that's the extent of my women's basketball. If I'm being completely honest with you, I'm obviously up to date on all of this. It's hard not to be, but for me, if it's a hard foul when you're playing ball, cool, like that happens, right? But I think I think there's a level, and I know the women are saying that there isn't one. But there's clearly a level of jealousy that is involved, and it's crazy to me that you're seeing this. You would never see this level of I don't care if you want to call it hazing, whatever you want to call it, would never happen in the NBA game, right? It just wouldn't. You would never see a guy like LeBron or a guy like Steph because she's on their level. Like let's keep it real. She's absolutely on their level when it comes to drawing eyes, ears, and attention to the league. And I know a lot of women are like, no, we've been getting this. No, you haven't. Not to the extent of what she has brought to the game in a very short amount of time, right? And so I get, there are veterans who are going to be upset by it because they feel like they deserve some of that, and they probably do. But there's always that generational person. I think for the first time in the women's game, she is that generational person, right? She is, you can talk about Diana Taurasi, Breanna Stewart, you can talk about Maya Moore, you can talk about Lisa Leslie, Rebecca Lobo, you can talk all the greats, but none of them were as transformational as she is, right? And so I just don't understand why there's not more of embracing her in the eyes and the ears and the fans that she's bringing to the game that would never otherwise watch a WNBA game, right? It just wouldn't happen. And it was funny yesterday. Angel Reese went on and said, "Look, they're watching because of me too." Ratings say you're full of it. You can't keep comparing yourself to the NBA when you're not doing NBA things. And Steph Curry never did this when he was coming into the league. LeBron didn't deal with this. Dwayne Wade didn't deal with this. Michael Jordan didn't deal with this. And that dude had to go play the bad boy Pistons, right? They didn't throw him around like that. Yeah, they created some hard fouls, but they didn't throw him around like they're doing her. So it's definitely interesting, and it definitely gives us something to talk about, and it gives people other things to focus on. But I really wish that the 100% of the conversation about her could center around sports and not race.
Yeah, totally agreed on that. And I think the biggest thing for me is the fact that her teammates aren't really coming to her defense. And part of that, Jeff, I think, is them kind of being shocked that this is happening too. This has probably never happened to one of their teammates as well. So they're kind of like sitting there stunned, like, is this seriously happening? But I mean, at some point, the coach has to go crazy to get ejected just to show that sign of emotion. And her teammates need to band together and have her back. I think Matt Barnes was getting to this point, alluding to it. He put it most eloquently where, when he was sort of like the enforcer for his stars, like Kobe Bryant, he'd go up to their defense when they get roughed up. And that's the thing that's missing. I don't fault the WNBA players for hating on her. They're competitive players. They want her to earn it. They're testing her. Obviously, it's going a little too far. But really, I think it's more on her teammates and coach for not really showing that passion to protect her.
Oh, 100%. And I don't have an issue with the hard fouls, right? Like that's, you watch the men game, Luka gets away with a lot of pinching, right? Like he does a lot of really dirty things. It's the off-ball stuff that I have a problem with. And I don't care if it's Caitlin, I don't care if it's Kobe. I don't like the off-ball stuff just needs to stop. You want to foul somebody hard going to the rack, cool. You want to take a shot at their midsection while they're going up for a jumper, cool. It's the off-ball stuff that to me just has to stop. And I do agree. Like I would not want to play for a team whose teammates didn't have my back because I damn sure would have yours.
Well, we spoke about 5 minutes on a purely football podcast on the WNBA, so that just shows you the effect that Caitlin Clark is having. But now let's get to I'm pretty sure our hardcore football junkies are waiting for us to get to the football content. And as a full disclosure, for those of you that don't know, I'm a hardcore Dirty Birds fan, Atlanta Falcons. And I try to be objective, but if I start having like a positive tone towards them, just want to call that out from the beginning. But I want to discuss with Jeff the impending punishment for the Falcons due to the tampering charges for Kirk Cousins when he, early on during like his first like media days or whatever, where he indicated that he provided medical records to the Falcons trainers due to his really gruesome Achilles injury. I've seen on Pro Football Talk, specifically Mike Florio, speculating that we would have to forfeit draft capital to the Vikings, and that capital could be as high as the first round pick of the draft that just happened. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition. He has a law background, Jeff, so I'd assume he'd know a thing or two about precedent, and there's really none here for tampering. The Vikings I'd be shocked if the Vikings are going to profit off the tampering charges. But I wanted to run that across to you, Jeff. What are you hearing? Are the Vikings going to get anything out of this? And what will our actual punishment be?
The only time in recent history, or the only time at all, and sorry, CJ's in the picture.
No, that's totally fine. I love it.
The only time in recent memory that teams have actually had picks was the Eagles and the Cardinals when actually involved the coach though, right? Like it wasn't a player, and the only time you've ever seen a first round involved taken away from anybody was with the Dolphins with Tom Brady, right? But like he was on that dude's yacht 3 different times, right? Like the very different circumstances, and so it's mind blowing to me that people are still buying anything that Mike Florio has to say, law degree or not. Like he's out of his mind. And with a lot of what he says, but this whole Vikings thing has just been absolutely absurd. I've said from the beginning, the punishment, I would be shocked if the punishment was anything more than what you saw the Chiefs get a few years ago, right? A 3rd and a 5th or a 3rd and a 6th. I don't think there's any doubt that the Falcons are going to lose a draft pick or two. I think that has been the standard when you look at tampering among the NFL. I would be shocked if it's the first or second. This is not one of those tampering issues where it was egregious. To your point, like Kirk Cousins literally sent him, he talked to the head trainer, right? Like he wanted to get his, continue his rehab with the team, right? And so that's, at that point, that's number one, and that's the issue number one with him, right? Is that's the most important thing. And my agent told me this is where I'm going. I agreed to those terms. At that point, like let me get that set up, right? And so yeah, it sucks, and yes, he probably should have waited another 24 hours, but this is not the same thing where they were reaching out to him months earlier, right? Going back to like the end of the Viking season, trying to get him to come. Everything else was followed pretty legally, with the exception of him reaching out to the head trainer again to get up rehab set up. So I would be shocked if the Falcons lost anything other than maybe a 3rd and a 5th or a 3rd and a 6th. You just haven't reached the levels of tampering with a coach while they're still in season, like you saw with the Eagles and Cardinals. This is not Tom Brady going on Arthur Blank's yacht or private planes. having Christmas, like just none of those things, right? So it's crazy that a guy who has as much respect as Mike Florio does, whether you agree with the respect or not, that he would keep, because he's been putting those things out there now for months. And it just, I laugh every time I see it because it's just not going to happen.
It's just so crazy to me that someone that has like his like cachet in the media or whatever is just spinning these like speculative like articles and stuff. It makes me wonder, is this guy just like jealous that we have Cousins and Penix and he's stuck with Darnold and JJ McCarthy? I bet he'd trade both of them for the two we have in a heartbeat. So
100%.
Yeah.
And there's always that fine line, right? When you're in media and you let your fandom take over, you have that fine line of walking that, but he seems to be crossing that line when it comes to the Vikings. And under notice, regardless of what draft picks they lose, they're not going to be given to the Vikings, right? Like that is just never going to happen. This is never going to reach that. Even with the Tom Brady case, New England didn't get draft picks from the Dolphins for it. Tampa Bay didn't get draft picks from the Dolphins for it. Again, you saw teams avoid, and that was the one thing with the Cardinals and the Eagles was they agreed for the pick to avoid anything else. And that wasn't anything that the NFL didn't come down and say, hey, you have to give them these picks. The two teams basically agreed to trade the coach, which has happened before, right? We saw Gruden get traded. Like that happens before. So those two teams did that to simply avoid any punishment from the league. And the league said, cool, you guys handled it. Both are happy. Not a big deal, right? So other than that, I cannot remember a single time in NFL history where teams have been, given other teams draft picks for any tampering purposes, right? Like I can't find one. I can't think of one offhand. And so that was the only thing that I can think of. But that's what people keep bringing up is the whole Cardinals-Eagles thing. But really, those two teams essentially agreed to trade a coach, which is why there was a draft pick involved in that one, going from one to the other.
Yeah, and in the case of the Brady situation too, I think Sean Payton was involved in that as well. So the Dolphins got dinged for Brady and Payton tampering charges. So, Jeff, last time we talked, I don't think the schedule was out yet, but I want to list out the first 5 games because I think that they're brutal and we could easily go winless or even just win 2 games in the stretch. So check this out. We open up with Pittsburgh at home, the Arthur Smith revenge game. We typically always have trouble with teams that have a great defense, conservative coach, kind of like what Arthur Smith is going to run, that kind of offense or whatever. Then we get Philly in their home opener on Monday Night Football. Then we get KC Sunday Night Football in Atlanta. And then the following 2 games versus New Orleans, which is always going to be tough, and versus Tampa Bay Thursday Night Football. So 3 primetime games in the first 5 weeks. And over the past 3 years, we've only had 2 primetime games. This team is used to playing at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays. Now they're playing all these teams on primetime, playoff teams, going into Philly, getting the Super Bowl, the defending 2-time Super Bowl champions or back-to-back Super Bowl champions, Kansas City. This can't, I know the schedule looks easy from like a metrics perspective. I'm seeing all these articles out that Falcons have a really easy strength of schedule, whatever. But those first 5 games, man, they're pretty brutal. What do you think?
Yeah, I've always kind of going from backwards to answer your question, right? One, I've always hated that metric of basing a schedule on last year's results, right? Which is what they always do. Like, yes, the Commanders finished basically dead last year. It doesn't mean that'll happen this year, right? Like, the Raiders, they finished hot and you have them week 15. I've never agreed of basing how difficult a schedule is on this year versus what happened last year, because every year, what is it, 80% of the teams who made the playoffs the previous year don't make it again, right? So, but we still kind of use that metric. So kind of going back to your question, though, of those first 5 games, getting week number 1 at home, I think this town will be ready for it. Even though it's a 1 o'clock game, I think there will be a lot of eyes on that game to begin with. I kind of made this statement tongue in cheek. Falcons go 5-0. right? And all of a sudden 5-0, they're the talk of the NFL. Because when I look at this, right, like I look at the Steelers, they've got a lot of questions. They've probably had more turnover than anybody else in the NFL when it comes to, how quarterbacks and coaches and, I like that game. The Eagles, I don't know, man. Like it's hard
in Philly.
It's in Philly. And as long as they're not allowed to bring batteries into the game, they're probably not really that big of an issue, right? Like, the Eagles, look, they've lost their Hall of Famer up front, right? And Jason Kelce mattered. He was a big help. I think that's going to be a big question for the Eagles is how much does losing Kelce affect Jalen, right? Like that Kelce was known to make a lot of those calls. And now you don't have that. And now you got to go replace that. And they had a really good relationship. And it's, I'm not going to say it's easy to be an NFL quarterback when you have a Hall of Fame center, but it's easier, right? Especially when you're a young guy and they have to replace that now, right? So I'm not going to say that that's all that difficult. Yeah, in a Monday night game, your first Monday night game in a while, there'll be a lot of emotion. I don't hate that game, right? Like that's just not a game where I'm like, oh, I think at that point you're 2-0. Then you got the Chiefs. Chiefs have not been able to concentrate on football yet. There's so much going on around that franchise right now that, and I get it. We're not really into the bread and butter of the NFL offseason yet, but like you've got a lot of questions, especially when everybody around that team shows up in late July, early August, when camp opens up. Those questions aren't going anywhere. And yes, you got Patrick Mahomes, you got Travis Kelce, you got Taylor Swift, you got a lot of star power over there that's going to be walking into Mercedes-Benz. But I'll be damned if this city's not going to be ready for that Sunday night football game. Like, I mean, this team is going to be ready. Yes, short week, understood. But if you can't get up for that game, you probably need to find a new job, right? Like that, this is not for you. But again, I like the fact that there's been so much turnover on this roster, and guys are really buying into Raheem Morris. And you've seen it OTA so far. Like Raheem just brings a whole different energy than this franchise has seen in a really, really long time. And I love that for them. I think that gives them a whole different identity, which they desperately and drastically needed, right? So, it's the Chiefs. Yes, it's the back-to-back Super Bowl winners. Guess what? They've never gone undefeated. At some point, they got to lose. Why not week 3 here in Atlanta? If this game was in Arrowhead in November, probably different conversation. You get that game indoors early in the season to start the year when they're still trying to figure out who they are and still answering some of the questions from the tumultuous offseason they've had so far. Cool. You were moving to week 4. Now you have New Orleans again, another game at home. F the Saints. Whether they're even better or not. Drew Brees is not walking in that door anymore. Drew Brees was there. He went 23-9, I think, against the Falcons in his career.
Torched us.
Different conversation now, right? So, Derek Carr doesn't scare anybody, other than probably his wife. Other than that, like I just don't see that game being an issue. And then Tampa Bay, again, another game at home. I think that's the big thing that people aren't really talking about. Your first 4 of your 5 games are at home, right? And like that's huge. Again, another really short week between those 2 games, which they obviously did not do the Falcons any justice with. Having Tampa and New Orleans back to back. I don't see a reason though that the Falcons don't go 6-0 in division play. I just don't see it as far as why they don't. So I think there's a really good chance that this team, to your point, they could be 0-5, but they could also be 5-0. I really do like the fact that they've got those first 5 games at home. It gives them a chance to sleep in their own bed while they figure out who they are. And so I really like that.
Wow. Well, I didn't see that angle coming, Jeff, and I love your fandom, your borderline, Florio at this point. But, I love hearing that. I'm not as confident as you, and maybe that's just the past 5 years, man, like shit, we haven't made the playoffs since 2017. So it's hard for me to think that we could actually open up the season with a winning record. Like even 3-2 there, I'd be happy because the rest of the schedule is going to be, we'll have Carolina twice, we get the Raiders, etc. So, I mean, then it becomes easier. So we'll see what happens then. Yesterday, Bijan Robinson made headlines when he stated that he expects to have a CMC type role in the offense next year. Last year, Jeff, it was close to a 50-50 timeshare between Bijan and Algier, where Bijan got slightly more carries. But CMC, I mean, he's everything to that San Francisco offense. Do you think that at the very minimum, this is going away from a timeshare and closer to like a 60-40 situation between Algier and Bijan?
Oh, I wouldn't be shocked if it was more of a 70-30,
wow.
To be completely honest with you. You don't draft a guy 8th overall and not put him on the field unless your name is Arthur Smith, right? In which case, like, you hold a guy out for literally, 59 of your 60 minutes, and all of a sudden that last minute you throw your 8th overall pick in the game to go carry, for whatever reason. So Zach Robinson, he took this job because there's a lot of weapons here. And they've spent a lot of the early part of the OTAs really figuring out who they have in Kyle Pitts and who they have in Bijan Robinson and who they have in London. And Zach Robinson is salivating. Like, he can't wait to get these guys on the field. This offense with a good veteran quarterback. I mean, he's not Matt Ryan. Kirk Cousins is not a Hall of Famer. But he's a very, very good veteran quarterback who, by the way, yes, it's against air, but he has looked really good so far at OTAs throwing the football, which, coming off the injury he's coming off of is really important, right? And he's starting to build that time with the offensive line. He's starting to build, he joked the other day of wanting to take the offensive line basically out together to go watch Heavyweights. Apparently that's one of his favorite movies, and he used a lot of one-liners from it, and he wants everybody to understand where those one-liners come from, right? So you finally have a veteran quarterback. You have a really good coaching staff who's going to allow him to lead, but more importantly, you have a veteran quarterback who understands what it takes to get on the same page with everybody, and those weapons are a big reason why he decided to come here. I mean, he left Justin Jefferson behind, right? And that probably wasn't a decision he made very easily. I mean, we saw the contract Jefferson got yesterday. It was very deserved. And so, you're coming here to a place like Atlanta where you haven't made the playoffs in 7 seasons. That, you're not replacing the greatest player in franchise history. You're about 2 years removed from it. So you've given yourself a little bit of that gap that you need. So, I just think all in all, the energy out there in OTAs has been absolutely insane. Again, just top to bottom different. And maybe I am drinking the Kool-Aid too much because of that. But the changes they made, they are wholesale, completely different top to bottom changes. And there's a lot of really elite football minds here finally. And guys that have been through, this is not an Arthur Smith situation where the dude has been in the league for 5 years as a coach, 5 other years as basically a quality control analyst. Raheem Morris has coached his ass off for 20 years now, right? Like, he's been an actual assistant on both sides of the football for 20 years. Zach Robinson understands, your side of it as far as the analytics go, but he also understands the play calling side of it, right? So, there's so much to be excited about. And again, going back to just the schedule, you get your first 4 out of 5 at home. Like, that really helps as you're trying to figure out who you are, that you don't have to worry about jumping on a plane and sleeping in hotel rooms. You get to be in your facilities, in your bed, in your normal routine to help get those things established.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I saw it as 4 of the 5 teams are playoff teams from last year, but hey, like you said, records from last year, they're not the best indicators in the world for strength of schedule. So we'll see where the chips fall. Jeff, I'm really curious. You talked about Arthur Smith not using Bijan Robinson, and I think for people that play fantasy football, the one game that sticks out is when the Falcons visited Tampa Bay. I think that Bijan Robinson wasn't listed on the injury report and he only played like one snap. I'm curious, do you have any like extra details on what exactly went down in that game where I think he like got migraines, or they said he had migraines like 15 minutes before kickoff, like quote unquote? What actually went down there, if you know?
So I mean, that's really, I honestly, I don't ever want to speculate on anything. A lot of that coming off that week was people were upset that Robinson hadn't been used for fantasy reasons, and Arthur Smith was known to everybody. I mean, you know, not just the fans, but the front office had a really hard time with him, right? Because he wanted to prove that he was the smartest guy in the room, and questions kept popping up about the use of the 8th overall back, right? Like you took him 8th overall and you're not using him because he really hadn't even been used that much. To your point, you alluded to a few minutes ago, 50-50, right? Who drops a running back 8th overall in the top 10 in today's day and age and doesn't use him? And so I think,
No good answer.
No, because there's not a good answer, right? Because even if he did have a migraine, which he doesn't have a history of, by the way, you know, it's not like, you know, going back to watching him in Texas, which is all we had, he didn't miss games for migraines. Right? And then all of a sudden he goes through warm-ups, he's ready to go, and then he's scratched, and it takes one play at the end of the game. And by the way, if for most people with migraines, if you've ever had them before, you're typically in a dark room, you know, getting over those symptoms. You're not out in the bright lights of a football stadium for hours, and then all of a sudden you can go, yep, I can play, I'm ready to go, right? Like that excuse just never makes sense. Migraines are debilitating if you've ever had one. Even the less serious ones, you're not out, again, with bright light shining on you and 80,000 people screaming, right? It just does not help at all. And if you've had them before, you understand that, right? So I felt like it was the easiest cop-out, almost like, and this is going to ruffle some feathers, and I apologize, but today, you know, people are like, oh, I have a mental health issue. Well, we don't question that, right? Like, that's the one thing you can say to people that stops them dead in their tracks and nobody questions it. And I'm a big mental health guy. I really am. I've battled depression my entire life. So I care a lot about mental health. But it's the one thing that somebody can say. They're like, nope, we're not going to answer that. Well, you know, he comes out and says, well, he was injured, he had a migraine. Well, guys aren't going to go to Bijan and say, you know, did you have a migraine? Because he's not going to throw his coach under the bus. So it's one of those things where it just stops people dead in their tracks. And so I don't think it was ever believed. I don't think anybody who covers the team believed it. Bijan certainly didn't look like he had a migraine at all during that game, because if you remember, cameras kept panning to him. He didn't look like he had any symptoms of a migraine. So it was, again, it's believed to be one of those things where he wanted to prove that he was the smartest guy in the room and that he can make those decisions and that he didn't like to be questioned, which ultimately is why his ass got fired.
Yeah, and honestly, if there's a situation where the guy ends up our head coach if he just doesn't go crazy at the end of the Saints game, or we don't get blown out of that and he's back, Ritter's back, and all this positive stuff that we're getting out of Raw, and it's kind of down the drain. So, Jeff, I wanted to ask you, what's the latest with like defensive free agents like Calais Campbell, Stephon Gilmore, Xavier Howard? Are you hearing that we're getting any closer to signing some of these vets to help us out?
All three of those guys have offers.
Wow.
At this point, the Falcons have obviously said the right things, of we're going with what we have. You know, we're not looking to add anybody. All three of those guys have offers. And I think you're seeing, two of those three have been in the NFL for about, for more than a decade now with Gilmore and Campbell. I would assume it's just two veterans who don't want to go through camp, who don't care to go through OTAs, who don't want to deal with any of that nonsense, which I understand. I may not agree with it, but I understand it. The Howard thing is kind of odd to me, to be honest with you, especially given that he does have, he does have some ties here to the coaching staff. So, if any one of those three reached out and said, hey, we're coming, you would see some moves made to accommodate them. I'm shocked that it hasn't happened yet. But you never know what a player is thinking, especially an older veteran like Campbell and like Gilmore. So, will one of those guys sign here? Hopefully, you see that as you get closer to the end of the preseason. Preseason weeks 3 or 4. As you get closer to those, if those guys even want to come back, they may not. They may be done. So we'll see. But yeah, all 3 of those guys, according to my source, have offers, and it's up to them to decide what they're going to do.
Last question, Jeff, and this comes from our site's founder, ffmetrics.com, RC Fisher. He would have guessed that Ahkello Witherspoon, cornerback for the Rams last year, would have signed with Atlanta. At times, RC thought that he looked really good for the Rams, but he did start getting burned late in the season. There were a couple of plays where he didn't look so hot. And, with Raw coming over, it's natural to connect the dots. We have a need at corner, right, opposite of Terrell. Have you heard anything regarding Witherspoon? Does he want too much money, or do you think that Raw's just staying away from him?
So I did specifically ask about that name because that was a name that had come up a lot, going back to free agency in March. And I was told that was not a name that they extended an offer to. For whatever reason, I was not given a reason because they didn't have one. But I was told that he was not somebody that they offered a contract to. Could it be a guy that they, potentially look at later on down the road? I guess. I don't know. But right now, that was a name that I've asked about, but that was a name that I was told that they did not offer to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You would think that Raw, he was close to the situation. So if he thought that Witherspoon was the right fit, he'd probably be over here. So,
right.
Yeah, maybe down the line, like you said, especially if, Howard and Gilmore decline the offers or go elsewhere, he's probably on their short list. So we'll see what happens. But Jeff, want to thank you again for your time. You're one of the real ones, man. You hopped on here. We're still trying to grow. Our site's been around for more than a decade, but we're trying to grow our social media presence. So seriously, man, thank you so much for coming out, always showing up. This one was on short notice too. I gave Jeff less than 24 hours. The guy's working like crazy on his day jobs too. So really, Jeff, appreciate your time.
Always, man. Andrew, I appreciate you having me on. Give RC my best. He's been great. I appreciate getting emails from him too. And I try to send out as much as I can with your socials. Though I'm a pretty big lightning rod on social media. So I guess it is what it is. But
hey, man,
I appreciate any opportunity you guys want. I'm always happy to jump on.